Family, I want to share something today that may sound shocking at first. God said, stop being kind to everyone. Now, before you misunderstand, hear me. God is love. God is merciful, and God calls us to walk in grace. But kindness without discernment is not Christ, like it is compromise. There's a difference between the fruit of the Spirit and the fear of man. Some of us are exhausted, not because the devil is attacking us, but because we are pouring ourselves into places God never asked us to sow. Kindness is a beautiful thing, but when it is extended without discernment, it can quietly turn into bondage. Many people live exhausted, not because they are under spiritual attack, but because they are entangled in obligations that God never asked them to carry. They confuse being nice with being Christ-like, and in that confusion, they become trapped in a cycle of pleasing people rather than pleasing God. True kindness flows from love and truth, but when it is stripped of wisdom, it becomes nothing more than fear of rejection dressed up as virtue. Jesus himself demonstrated that divine love is not the same as human niceness. He was tender with the brokenhearted, merciful to sinners, and compassionate toward the sick. Yet he also stood firm against those who misused God's name. He called the Pharisees hypocrites to their faces. He walked away from whole crowds that demanded his attention. He chose 12 disciples out of thousands, and even within the 12, he poured deeper into 3. His life teaches us that love is selective with its time and energy. He gave freely, but he also guarded his mission with unwavering clarity. That's what many of us miss when we attempt to be kind to everyone without asking God where to invest that kindness. When you try to be endlessly kind without discernment, you end up enslaved to expectations. People begin to treat your yes as permanent, your availability as a given. Instead of being led by the Spirit, you are pulled by the strings of obligation. And bondage doesn't always come with chains. It can come with too many favors, too many commitments, too many drains on your emotional and spiritual energy. Slowly, you realize that what you call kindness is actually captivity. Discernment is the key that frees kindness from this trap. The Spirit gives us wisdom to know when to say yes and the courage to say no. Without that wisdom, kindness becomes a counterfeit of love. Love brings life, correction, and truth. Counterfeit kindness only brings exhaustion, compromise, and resentment. God's love sometimes looks like extending grace, but other times it looks like setting a boundary or walking away. If you cannot say no, then your yes has no value. Let me give you an example. Imagine a young woman named Sarah who is known by everyone in her church as the sweet one. Whenever someone asks for help, she is the first to volunteer. Babysitting, cooking, running errands, serving at every event, she is always there. At first, people applaud her generosity, but over time, they begin to expect it. They stop asking if she's available and start assuming she is. Meanwhile, Sarah's own calling to mentor young girls in the youth ministry gets neglected because she is too drained from doing things God never asked of her. What looks like kindness has become a snare. She isn't being led by the Spirit. She is being driven by people's needs. It's not that her actions are wrong, but without discernment, they are misaligned. Eventually, Sarah has to learn that true obedience is not about keeping everyone happy, but about following the assignments God gives her. That's the danger of kindness without discernment. It feels noble, but it quietly robs you of focus, peace, and strength. God never called you to carry every burden, meet every need, or please every voice. He called you to walk in wisdom, to let your love be guided by His Spirit, and to let your kindness reflect His priorities, not the demands of people. Discerned kindness brings freedom, but undiscerning kindness will always breed bondage. Love in its purest form is not weakness, but strength with clarity. Many people confuse unconditional love with unconditional access, and that misunderstanding leads to unnecessary pain. God calls us to love freely, but He does not call us to expose ourselves to endless drain or manipulation. Love is powerful precisely because it knows when to give and when to guard, when to embrace and when to step back. Without boundaries, love loses its purity and becomes enabling, draining, or even destructive. The truth is, you are not called to carry every burden or respond to every cry for help. The Bible tells us to bear one another's burdens, but it also teaches that each person must carry their own load. There's a balance in the kingdom of God between compassion and responsibility. When you attempt to take on what God never asked of you, you end up interfering with his process in someone else's life. Sometimes what looks like love is actually blocking the lesson God is trying to teach them. This is why boundaries are not rejection, they are divine protection. They protect your time, your energy, and your ability to stay aligned with your God-given assignment. Even Jesus, who perfectly embodied love, practiced boundaries. He fed the multitudes, but he didn't stay with them all day, every day. He healed many, but he often withdrew to be alone with the Father. He chose 12 disciples, but he invested deeply in only 3. He drew lines that protected his mission, his energy, and his clarity of purpose. That was not unkindness. It was wisdom. If the Son of God needed boundaries to fulfill his assignment, how much more do we? When you fail to establish boundaries, your love becomes unsustainable. You burn out trying to meet everyone's needs, only to discover that no matter how much you give, it will never be enough. Boundaries allow your love to remain strong, intention, and spirit-led. They make it possible for you to say yes with joy instead of resentment, because your yes is no longer forced, it's chosen. Boundaries do not shrink love, they preserve it. Think of it this way. A river without banks becomes a flood. Water is life, giving when it flows within its boundaries. But the moment it spills everywhere, it destroys. Love works the same way. With boundaries, love nourishes, heals, and empowers. Without them, it overwhelms and harms. Here's a simple example. Imagine a man named David who is known for his generosity. Whenever his family members need money, they come to him. At first, he gives freely, believing he is showing love. But over time, he notices a pattern. His brother uses the money recklessly, never changing his habits because David always bails him out. His cousin becomes dependent, expecting David to cover bills without even trying to budget. David feels drained, resentful, and trapped. One day after praying, he realizes that what he called love was actually enabling irresponsibility. So he sets a boundary. He tells his family, I love you, but I can't continue giving money without accountability. I will help you learn how to manage your finances, but I won't rescue you from the same mistakes over and over. At first, they are upset, but over time, his brother begins to grow, and his cousin learns to stand on his own feet. David's boundary did not mean he stopped loving them. It meant he loved them wisely. That is what it means when we say love requires boundaries. It is not about withholding affection or turning people away. It is about protecting the space where genuine love can flourish. Boundaries keep you faithful to your purpose and free from unnecessary bondage. They allow you to love in a way that is sustainable, truthful, and aligned with God's will. True love says, I will walk with you, but I will not let you destroy me in the process. And that is not rejection. It is the highest form of wisdom and protection. Kindness, on the surface, appears to be one of the most virtuous qualities a person can display. It is gentle, it is affirming, and it usually wins the approval of others. But kindness on its own can sometimes disguise itself as something it is not. When it is detached from truth, it becomes a counterfeit of love. Love does not simply aim to make people feel good. It seeks their ultimate good, which often requires speaking truth that may be uncomfortable in the moment. When our kindness is motivated by the desire to be liked, we risk sacrificing authenticity and integrity in exchange for temporary peace. There is a difference between kindness that flows from love and kindness that grows out of fear. The former is courageous. It tells the truth even when it risks rejection. The latter is cowardly. It avoids hard conversations and uncomfortable boundaries because it craves approval. This is why God never called us to be merely kind. He called us to walk in love. Kindness is part of love, but it cannot replace it. Love sometimes looks like compassion, but it also sometimes looks like correction. And when correction is withheld in the name of being nice, what we are really doing is choosing our comfort over someone else's growth. Jesus modeled this with clarity. He was full of compassion, healing the sick, feeding the hungry, and forgiving the broken. But he also spoke truth directly, even when it offended. He overturned tables in the temple. He called out hypocrisy. He told the rich young ruler that he must give up his wealth to follow him, fully knowing the man might walk away, and he did. Was Jesus being unkind? No, he was being loving. His words were not meant to flatter, but to free, not to soothe the ego, but to awaken the soul. If he had chosen mere kindness over love, the truth would have been hidden and the opportunity for transformation lost. Kindness without truth creates shallow peace that never lasts. It avoids conflict for the sake of harmony, but allows deeper issues to fester. True love, however, is willing to risk misunderstanding in order to bring healing. Love is not concerned with being liked. It is concerned with being faithful. Sometimes the most loving thing you can do is say no to a request that would harm someone in the long run, or no to behavior that is destructive, even if it makes the person upset in the moment. Take the example of Maria, a manager at a small company. She prided herself on being kind and approachable. One of her employees, Jake, was constantly late, missed deadlines, and disrupted the team's rhythm. Maria, wanting to keep the peace, always responded with kindness. She would cover for him, excuse his behavior, and even redo his work so he wouldn't face consequences. At first, everyone saw her as understanding and kind, but over time, resentment grew. The rest of the team felt demoralized because their hard work was being overshadowed by Jake's irresponsibility. Maria's kindness was not producing love, it was producing imbalance. Finally, after months of struggle, she realized that her fear of confrontation was preventing her from leading well. She sat down with Jake, clearly explained the expectations, and told him that continued negligence would cost him his job. It was uncomfortable, and Jake did not like it. But that moment of truth gave him a choice he had never faced before. To everyone's surprise, he rose to the challenge. He became more disciplined, his performance improved, and the team flourished. What appeared harsh in the moment was actually the most loving action Maria could have taken. This is the difference between kindness and love. Kindness aims to please, love aims to transform. Kindness tries to keep peace at any cost. Love is willing to disturb false peace in order to establish real freedom. And so, when God calls us to love, He is not asking us to be endlessly agreeable. He is asking us to be truthful, courageous, and discerning. Sometimes love will sound gentle and affirming. Other times, it will sound like a firm no. But in every case, it will be guided not by the desire to be liked, but by the commitment to bring life and truth. Jesus modeled something that many of us struggle to accept. Not everyone deserves equal access to your life. He showed us that love can be universal, but intimacy must be intentional. He loved the multitudes, healed the sick, fed the hungry, and spoke words of hope to all who would listen. His love was without limits, yet his access was strategic. Out of thousands, he chose 70 to send out. Out of the 70, he chose 12 to walk with him closely. Out of the 12, he brought only 3, Peter, James, and John, into his most vulnerable, sacred moments. And even among those 3, there were levels of revelation and trust that differed. This was not favoritism, it was wisdom. If Jesus, who embodied perfect love, did not give everyone the same measure of himself, why do we feel guilty when we cannot? Too often we believe that loving people means giving them full access to our time, our emotions, our energy, and even our dreams. But that is not biblical love. That is poor stewardship. Love can be unconditional, but access must be earned and managed wisely. When you give everyone equal access, you dilute your energy, confuse your purpose, and often place sacred things in the wrong hands. Some people cannot handle your vulnerability. Others will mishandle your trust. And some will drain your strength without ever pouring anything back into you. That is why discernment matters. Jesus understood his mission, and that clarity guided his relationships. The multitudes came to him with needs, and he met them with compassion. But he did not stay with the crowd all night to hear every complaint. He often withdrew to quiet places, prioritizing his relationship with the Father above the demands of people. He knew that his ultimate assignment required focus, and he arranged his access points accordingly. The 12 disciples received his daily teaching, his corrections, and his mentorship. They got what the crowd could not: consistent proximity. Yet even within that inner circle, he invited only Peter, James, and John to moments of deeper intimacy, such as the Mount of Transfiguration or the Garden of Gethsemane. When he was in his most vulnerable moment of prayer, preparing for the cross, he did not take all 12, he took 3. That's not because he loved the others less, but because he knew who could carry the weight of that moment. An example makes this clear. Imagine a young pastor named Daniel. He has a heart for people and wants to be available to everyone in his congregation, Every time someone calls, he answers, no matter the hour. Every request for counseling, he accepts, even if it means neglecting his family or his health. At first, the people admire his availability, but over time, Daniel becomes exhausted. His sermons lose their fire because he spends more time putting out individual fires than hearing from God. His family feels neglected, and his spirit begins to dry out. One day, an older mentor reminds him Jesus loved everyone, but he didn't disciple everyone. He gave the crowd miracles, but he gave his disciples his life. Daniel realizes he has been trying to give equal access to everyone, and it is costing him his purpose. So he makes a change. He appoints leaders to handle certain needs, continues to love the congregation, but chooses a small group of young leaders to personally mentor. He sets boundaries not out of selfishness, but out of wisdom. As he does, his strength returns, his family flourishes, and the church grows in health. The lesson is simple but profound. You are called to love all, but you are not called to carry all. Access is a privilege, not a right. Guard it wisely. Jesus himself set the example. He was never unloving, but he was always discerning. He showed us that selective access is not rejection. It is stewardship of your calling, your energy, and your destiny. When you understand that, you will no longer feel guilty for creating boundaries. Instead, you will recognize that by limiting access, you are preserving your ability to love deeply, serve faithfully, and walk fully in your God-given assignment. One of the most dangerous traps a person can fall into is living to please people instead of living to please God. At first glance, it looks noble. You are helpful, agreeable, and always ready to say yes when asked. People applaud your availability, admire your generosity, and even label you dependable. But beneath the surface, something more subtle is happening. Every time you say yes to someone without asking if God has assigned it to you, you are saying no to something else. Often no to the very assignment he placed in your hands. Purpose and people pleasing cannot coexist peacefully for long because one will always demand what the other requires. God's purpose for your life is specific. It is not general, and it is not interchangeable. He has written works for you to do, things only you can fulfill in your unique calling. When you spend your energy on commitments he never asked you to take, you trade eternal impact for temporary approval. That is why so many people find themselves drained, not because they are under spiritual attack, but because their calendars are filled with obligations that heaven never authored. They confuse activity with assignment and assume business means productivity. But God is not impressed by how much we do. He is concerned with whether we are doing what he asked. Even Jesus modeled this truth. He did not heal every person in Israel, though he could have. He did not stay in one city until every need was met. There were times when the crowds begged him to remain, but he said no and moved on because his mission required him to keep going. If the Son of God himself refused to let the demands of people override the direction of the Father, then how much more must we learn to say no? Jesus showed us that obedience is not about doing everything. It is about doing the right things, the things heaven has assigned. The danger of people pleasing is that it feels rewarding in the moment. Someone thanks you, praises you, or calls you reliable, and it strokes your sense of worth. But that short-lived approval is costly. When you continually live to meet everyone else's expectations, you slowly silence the voice of God in your own spirit. You become more concerned with disappointing people than with disobeying God. And the tragedy is, the same people you bend over backward to please will often forget your sacrifices while you are left weary and empty. Consider the example of Angela, a gifted singer in her church. She felt God calling her to write songs that would bless the body of Christ, but every time she sat down to work on them, someone from her community called on her for help. She was the one everyone leaned on, organizing events, babysitting children, running errands, filling in at the last minute when someone else dropped out. Angela loved helping, and she wanted to be seen as dependable, so she kept saying yes. Weeks turned into months, and months into years, and her music remained unwritten. She was busy doing good things, but not the God thing. One day, a mentor asked her why she hadn't pursued the songwriting she often spoke about. With tears in her eyes, she admitted, "I was so afraid of letting people down that I ended up letting God down." That moment changed her life. She began to practice discernment, saying no when she needed to, carving out time for the assignment God had placed on her heart. It was not easy at first, and some people were offended. But as she obeyed, songs began to flow, doors began to open, and lives were touched in ways that none of her previous business could have accomplished. That is the essence of this truth. The anointing flows when you align with God's priorities, not everyone else's expectations. Approval from people may fill your ego, but obedience to God fills your spirit. Pleasing people might keep you busy, but pleasing God will keep you fruitful. Every yes you give must first pass through the filter of prayer. Lord, is this my assignment? Because if it is not, your yes to man will always be a no to God's greater purpose for your life. And nothing is worth that exchange. Beloved, hear this clearly. God did not call you to be kind to everyone. He called you to love everyone, and that love sometimes looks like truth, correction, distance, or silence. Stop giving away your oil to people who refuse to value it. Stop casting your pearls before swine. Step into wisdom. Step into discernment. Step into the courage of saying yes to God, even if it means saying no to man. Because when you do, your life will carry weight, your spirit will carry peace, and your purpose will carry power.